2020 has been a challenging year in America. We have the COVID pandemic, we have police misconduct and racial injustice, we have a highly contentious and partisan political environment, a whole set of issues that are challenging our country. The thing that unites all of these different issues together is that they're all about trust. If we're asking members of our society to defer to authorities, to make sacrifices, to compromise their attitudes and values, to defer their own interests, they're going to be looking at the motives and intentions of the people that are asking them to make these changes. They're going to think about character. They're going to infer, in other words, whether they trust this person to be acting in the interests of everyone in the community and to care about their personal needs and concerns. These are the issues that define whether people will defer to authorities, whether they will accept their recommendations, whether they're health officials, legal authorities, or political leaders.
When we talk about trust building, all of us should ask the question of ourselves, what's my role in building trust?
I believe trust building matters because we cannot move successfully forward unless we trust the motives and actions of those we must travel with. A fellow colleague of mine recently wrote, "Trust is essential for judge. It is a prerequisite for those who are asked to follow."
For many years, I was the chief judge for Milwaukee County. I'm answering your question about trust building and why it matters. Trust building matters to me because it is, in my opinion, the catalyst for all systemic change within the criminal justice system. In other words, you really can't accomplish anything by way of procedural fairness or change in the way you do business if you don't have trust between all the system players.
In my view, trust building absolutely matters for us in the judiciary. Everything that we do, from our internal policies to how court leaders treat the public, from walking in the front door all the way up to the bench, any of our actions either go toward fostering that trust between the public and the courts or work against that very thing. And I couldn't help but think of an excerpt from Federalist number 17. Alexander Hamilton reminded us that the ordinary administration of criminal and civil justice contributes more than any other circumstance to impressing upon the minds of the people affection, esteem, and reverence toward the government. So, yeah, to me, that just sums it up. That the roles we play are extremely important in either building positive relationships and trust or the opposite. And I know we all want the former.
We're making decisions in the criminal justice system that are very personal, very intimate decisions that quite oftentimes affect the very liberty of the individuals coming before us and their ability to remain free to function within their communities. And the institutions we set up are all too often large-scale courts that are, to anybody coming through, clearly overburdened, oftentimes understaffed, where the decision makers, when we're not in an active court session, are hidden away in back hallways away from the people there.
When you look at tension that exists between law enforcement communities today, trust is one of the key components that's missing between those communities and law enforcement. The reasons for those are many. It could be a history of how that community has experienced the police. It could be a recent event. Being able to create a space where both law enforcement communities can come together and have genuine conversations around their experiences and who they are, not just as a police officer, as a community member, but who they are as an individual, can help build that trust. Ultimately, the goal is to create better outcomes for both law enforcement communities in a partnership working together.
So how do you build trust in communities? It starts with communication. It starts with being present. You can't just show up every time it's elections every 4 years and think that you will be able to develop trust in the system and in the community. We have to be regular ambassadors when it comes to issues in the criminal justice system, be responsive to the community, and do so on a regular basis. We can do that by attending community meetings, by being on community forums, and by creating the space within our offices to make sure that the community can feel safe and feel heard. And once we hear from the community, we need to fight to implement the areas of concern that have been raised. Again, if we don't act on what we've been told, then we are not fully building that trust.
As someone who is a proponent of procedural justice, I really believe in individual justice in individual cases. And the same tact that I take in the courtroom is the same tact that I take as a judicial educator. It really means a lot of introspection.
I want to say first that trust to me is a two-way process. And it's an act of vulnerability to me as well. And trust can be built or otherwise changed in every interaction in the court system.
Everyone has to be treated with respect, of course.
Procedural justice, it's not a tool, it's not a practice. It has to be something that becomes foundational. Foundation, very basic and embedded in your very philosophy of how you're going to pursue justice each and every day for each and every case and each and every individual that comes before you. If it's not, if it's just a practice or a tool you're trying to use, people will see through that. And you won't gain that trust. And you won't have the acceptance of outcomes that we need to have.
We believe, and I believe, the procedural justice and trust building must not focus solely on external policies and practices, guiding how we serve individuals who are arrested and their families and communities, but it must also be reflected in our internal culture, how we build trust within, through engaging, empowering, and supporting staff at all levels of the agency.
You need to be willing to listen and not judge. Give people the opportunity to have a voice in their rehabilitation or whatever their challenge may be. Understanding that resistance is not personal, but based on negative experiences or trauma they have had in the past. Breaking down those barriers by building trust is crucial in working effectively together. Take the time to explain things. Remember, your position or location can be intimidating some people. Be thoughtful with your approach. Most importantly, always allow people to retain their dignity. People who feel devalued will continue to resist good-intentioned efforts. These techniques are also useful for leadership and staff and how it impacts organizational culture.
Think about trust building going forward. We think about a way that we can remove myths, we can remove misunderstanding by educating those we serve, by listening to those we serve, so we can improve on the actual service that we provide.
Of a quote from Maya Angelou about they may forget what you actually tell them, but they will not forget the way you made them feel.
We know a lot about how to build trust. That's what authorities need to know. They need to know how to create and maintain trust. We have a number of studies we've done over the years that tell us that the central feature that authorities need to focus on is using fair procedures to create rules, to implement rules, to make decisions, to enforce laws. So we have a lot to say to our society about how to create the conditions that will allow us to address our pressing needs.
In my role, trust building looks like making the promise of justice real in the daily lives of those that come through my court. And more importantly, making the promise of justice real for the larger community. In my role, trust building acknowledges that our justice system unfairly discriminates against minorities, against the poor, the mentally ill, the homeless, and the marginalized as a matter of practice. I believe that when judges began to fully utilize all the tools in the procedural justice toolbox, combining community outreach, education, advocacy, accountability, and transparency, then the opposite of trust, distrust, is removed, and confidence in our judicial institutions is the greatest.